This happened quite a long time ago, yet it is never too far from my mind. We continue to feel very lucky to have survived whatever might have happened. Read and tell me what you think. It was a long time ago, before cell phones were prevalent, and I was with my mom in my early 30s who had just driven our kids to the pediatrician. The Macomb, Georgia doctor's office was an hour away from our home, and I was just taking the two youngest of my three to our scheduled appointment. Because we lived so far away, their office always gave us the last two appointments of the day, and we were grateful. The doctor had just built a new building off the fresh spur of the highway, so the location was quite isolated in every direction, but a very nice facility compared to his old spot by the hospital there. His new building was also pretty far back on the new lot, and my car was one and only 4 or 5 cars in the parking lot when I arrived. I parked near the front door, removed the kids from their car seats, and for the next hour or so we waited, then saw the doctor, paid, and finally exited back outside. Mine was the only car left in the lot as I loaded the children into their car seats for our trip home. But as the receptionist locked the front glass doors, my car somehow wouldn't start when I turned the key. There was just an odd clicking noise. Gathering the children once again, I knocked on the door until someone allowed us back in and asked to borrow their phone to call a nearby garage for service. I found one in the phone book and the man said that he would come out, but it might be a bit. So I told him my location, left to go back out to the car, rolled down all the windows, and loaded the children back into their seats once more as we waited. Soon we watched as all the lights were turned out in the building again, and everyone left, the cars departing one by one behind the building somewhere, leaving us now completely alone in the parking lot. As it was still light, I spent a lot of the time trying to tend to the children, digging through our car for snacks in a bottle, making sure that they weren't getting too hot, etc. Although the service station attendant said that it was probably going to be a while, I was pleasantly surprised when a truck pulled into the empty parking lot pretty soon, and a man got out of his pickup truck, smiled and nodded to me, and said he was going to raise the hood. He was middle-aged and a bit scruffy, but quite frankly, many gas station attendees sometimes look that way, especially at the end of the day, and I was grateful when he began doing something under the hood almost immediately. I sat down again in the driver's seat with the door open, waiting for him to tell me to try the engine, but he seemed to be taking a long time, checking the connections, and I longed for him to just grab the jumper cables. Yet he never did. Without getting out of the car, I asked him what he thought was wrong, and he said, "Oh, it's just a loose wire, not the battery," and continued doing whatever he was doing. I couldn't see his face at all from where I was sitting, but his hands were slightly visible through the long horizontal slit between the windshield and the raised hood as we waited. More than once he said it was merely a loose wire, and if I would just come up here really quick he would show me which one it was, so it would never happen again. I remember kind of smiling and shaking my head, saying that sadly there was no chance to show me anything, as I didn't know anything about cars. I just thanked him and continued to stay in the driver's seat. Again, just waiting for the inevitable signal to try to start the ignition that was most surely coming at any moment. At one point I remember thinking that he was definitely flirting as he spoke, but I was trying above all to be polite and kind, as he was indeed helping us. We were hot and tired and miserable, and truthfully, I was distracted with the kids. Oddly enough, he was starting to sound a little frustrated with me, because I wouldn't come up and look at the engine. I remember thinking that I certainly didn't want to make him mad where he left us there all alone, with the sun sinking so quickly. And then the strangest thing happened. Another truck suddenly pulled into the desolate parking lot, and as it did, this nice guy working underneath my hood suddenly slammed it shut, ran to his truck, started it, and drove away very quickly, without even saying a word of goodbye. I was both confused and a little bit anxious when he did this, because I didn't know who was now arriving. I even remember feeling a little frightened that he had suddenly left me there alone with 2 little ones, defenseless. Why wouldn't he at least stay to speak to whoever was parking next to me now? It certainly seemed a southerly gentleman thing to do. I looked around and was very aware, once again, that there were no visible cars on the road, no homes or businesses nearby, and the sun was continuing to set quickly, as this new pickup pulled up next to me. I got out of the car once again, this time more apprehensively. Upon exiting though, he immediately introduced himself, and his name and voice seemed to match who I had spoken to on the phone much earlier. He then actually called me by name, apologized for being so late, and finally, smiled and stared towards the road, pointing and asking who that man was that just left so suddenly. Relieved and unfazed, I just smiled back in surprise and told him, "Well, I don't know. I thought all this time he was you." We both laughed slightly and he grabbed the jumper cables, walked to the front of my car, raised the hood, and started to work. I immediately sat back in the driver's seat once more, suddenly grateful that with luck, that the air conditioner would be blowing full blast shortly, and once again checking the children. While listening for the familiar words, "Try it," I had my back completely turned when he surprised me by suddenly coming to the driver's side door. In the strangest voice he said, "Ma'am, is this yours?" And when I looked into his hands, he was holding a long, thin, dagger-like looking device that was about 1.5 feet in length. It appeared to be very old and covered in reddish rust, yet on one end, it had tiny circular small finger holes, as if it was a mix of a long thin sword and scissors oddly combined. I remember being amazed but not frightened, and asked where he had found them. "Under the hood," I said, just as matter-of-factly that I had never seen them before, but how weird it was that those things had somehow been stuck and undiscovered in my car for all those years. I shook my head in surprise. He continued to stand there and stare at them. Unbelievingly, he looked oddly pale too, like he couldn't find the words to speak for a bit, just continuing to stare at the unusual object. Honestly, I didn't care one bit about it. All I could think was getting the car going, letting me pay him, and leaving. He didn't say anything else, just quickly set them on the curb, stared at his truck, and then signaled for me to start the Jeep. And when it immediately caught, my 3-year-old cheered. Gratefully, I quickly turned on the air conditioner full blast, rolled up all the windows, aimed the vents towards the back seat, and reached for my purse to pay out. I stood up and took a few steps to meet him so I could hear the amount now owed. With both of our vehicles running, he came back around to my driver's side, but instead of handling the bill, irritated me a bit by walking past me and picking up the weird object once more. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I want you to look at these one more time," and held them out for closer inspection. This time I moved a bit closer, and actually really looked. In his hands, the item still appeared incredibly large, possessing an almost bayonet-looking quality, except for the strangely small 2 loops on one end. I had never seen anything like it, and told him so. As he held it, he spoke quietly and slowly to me, as if trying desperately to make me understand something that was somehow still going over my head. "These weren't hidden in the engine, ma'am. They hadn't been there for very long at all, because they were sitting right on top. They must have just been put there." I shook my head and half smiled and said, "But they're obviously very old and rusty," to which he pointed more closely and replied, "Yeah, but you see how sharp these are? These look like they've just been sharpened." And when I looked down, he was right. The long, skinny dagger-like shape was unusual, but by far the oddest quality was just how sharp it appeared to be. The edges at the tip where the rust had been removed were gleaming silver. As I paid him, his final words to me were, "Ma'am, I don't know what was about to happen here, but I'm really glad I pulled up when I did." He quietly thanked me when taking the payment, told me that I probably needed to call the police when I got home, and then asked where I wanted the item. I didn't want to touch it, didn't want to take it at all, but I released the back window so he could place it inside. We both then left the lot together, him turning one way and me turning another towards a small winding highway that would lead home. Still an hour away. I did indeed contact the Macon police the moment we arrived home, and I got the children inside safely, but although they listened politely, they declined when I offered to bring the scissor-like thing to them later. The officer I spoke to said that they sounded as if they were specialized surgical shears, from my description and the measurements on the phone, which I found quite disturbing, as you can imagine. I remember wondering how he would even know that, why he would say that. I tried so carefully not to touch any of the surfaces, hoping that they might be able to lift prints or test for blood if they wanted, but the story seemed to bore him a bit, and he didn't seem interested. His attitude insinuated that, as there was no longer an emergency, it was of no importance now. At the very end of the call, as if to wind things down, he did say that it sounded as if I was very lucky, and that I might want to keep the shears for a few days, just in case someone from his office got back with me later. But that was all. I wrapped them carefully in newspaper and placed them in the back brick storage behind our house. And there they remained for several more years, untouched until we moved away and I finally, not wanting to bring them across several states, reluctantly threw them in the trash. Around that time though, if you look through old news reports, women were going missing all over Georgia. Some bodies were eventually found, but others remain missing to this very day. I had often wondered what would have happened if the service station attendant hadn't arrived when he did. If my children would still have a mother, if I would have still had my son and daughter, if I would have missed all those years with them. I guess I'll never know, but I learned something very important about myself that day. I had always felt I was pretty aware of my surroundings, pretty good at reading people, and staying safe. But because I was exhausted and tired and hot, and stranded in a different city, my common sense and intelligence simply left me for a bit, and wasn't working at the time. and many of my friends and family still think that our car troubles that day and my lack of awareness could easily have cost us our lives. Crazy beauty queen stalker. This is a long story, and it's been over 5 years in the making. I've actually posted this story before, but there are some really good internet sleuths here on Reddit, and they were able to figure out ex-beauty queen's identity, and mine too. I don't really care if I give up my identity, but I didn't want it to be on my actual account, so I deleted it a while back. The catalyst for me to repost it today, on a throwaway, is that it's cathartic. Last week, yet another court date for ex-beauty queen Stalker came and went. We've been expecting things to proceed with her entering a plea of guilty or not guilty, but no such luck. All we got was another vague reason to why she was not ready and a new court date issued, months from now. There have been many court dates since she got arrested. It's been over 18 months since she's been arrested for her continued stalking and harassment, and still wants to drag things on, to seemingly try and stay relevant in our lives. Anyway, on to the story. To recap, my husband dated a beauty queen title holder of a well-known pageant before me. They broke up long before we met. She was a statuesque blonde, very tall, a knockout in her day, in my opinion. This was somewhat important to the story, I guess. But while she was a dazzling pageant winner on the outside, on the inside, oh boy. She could be charming and beautiful if she needed you, but mostly, she treated people around her terribly, including my husband, and he eventually broke it off with her. But she never went away. She would continue to call and email repeatedly, even after my husband and I met. If anything, her calls increased. She would call over and over again, day and night, even after my husband blocked her number. She would ask for money and threatened to go to the police, claiming he abused her if he didn't give it to her. He obviously did not give her money. This made her very upset. The threats increased and became more malicious, but when that didn't work, she would switch tactics and sweetly try to ask for help with certain projects she was trying to get off the ground, with the promise that if he did just one last thing for her, she would go away. He did not reply, and she would go back to being malicious. Any tactic for attention, or for what she really wanted, money. My husband was terrified, because of course, while he never did anything to her, it would be her word over his, and he was terrified of ruining his reputation and career. We had unfortunately ended up at an event she also attended. She had been waiting for us to arrive and place herself near the entrance of the event. As we walked in, she stood across the room looking me up and down, laughing and whispering into the ear of her date, making a point to try to make me uncomfortable. But that was okay. She was easily ignored until she ambushed me as I came out of the bathroom. She had clearly been waiting for the moment I was alone. She towered over me. I had no intention of having it out with her, and as I hurriedly walked to find my husband, she kept pace behind me, hunched over, so she was at my eye level, her head turned towards me. She was like a caricature of herself as she ambled beside me, smiling maniacally. "Where's your man?" she hissed in her heavy accent. Her eyes were black. She looked like out of a Tim Burton movie, hunched over with that crazy demonic smile. "Watch your back, pug," she added, grinning. She liked to call me names like Pug because I owned pugs, and I guess she thought it was an insult. What I didn't know was while I was in the bathroom, she had walked over to my husband and had thrown her arm around him while he was in mid-conversation with somebody, and introduced herself to the man he was talking to, as if she and my husband were together. My husband unwrapped himself from her clutches and told her to beat it. She then beelined and waited for me to come out of the washroom. We stopped going to the parties. The last time we ran into her was at a funeral for a mutual friend. She followed me around at the wake. As my husband was talking to the man's widow, I was talking to a friend and his wife. She walked right up and stood with us, joining us mid-conversation as if she was part of the group. It was unnerving, but also just bizarre. It was a funeral and I did not want to make a scene. I silently picked up my wine glass off the bar and walked away, leaving her with the couple I had been speaking to, and her staring at me with a smirk on her face. All in all, annoying but manageable. However, the emails and calls never stopped. She would call my husband over and over, day and night, even though he had long blocked her number. She would drive by. I found my car keyed one night after I left it outside, but obviously I couldn't prove it was her. But enough was enough. My husband had a lawyer send a cease and desist. After the first, she called him from a private number. He answered and she said, "Hi, it's me," in a sing-song voice like they were best friends and he hadn't just sent a lawyer's letter ordering her to stay away from him and his family. He said nothing and hung up. Another cease and desist was sent, then a third. Nothing would make her go away. She did not actually think my husband was capable of not wanting to be with her, because her beauty. Eventually though, she got pissed that he was not giving in, so she decided to take this rage to the internet. I knew that she was absolutely checking out my social media, but I don't really use it much, so I didn't care. However, she created a fake Twitter account and tweeted, "My husband's name is a fraud," and tagged his colleagues, friends, investors, and family members. Every single person she could think of to try to ruin his reputation and career. On New Year's Eve, she posted on my Instagram account at exactly 12:01 a.m. "Happy New Year, Scrud." Social media settings were all put to private. We went to the police armed with the emails threatening to give her money or she would go to the police. She was charged with 2 counts of harassment, and the restraining order was put into place. To our shock, the next day after her arrest, our phones were buzzing. The story had made the front page news. Her day in court came right before COVID. We arrived to the courthouse and sat down. She walked in. We were shocked by her appearance. Actually, shocked is an understatement. She was unrecognizable from her former self. Gone was the statuesque, dazzling blonde. She had apparently shaved her head and was wearing a short, ratty brown wig. She had gained about 80 pounds, give or take. It was now sort of hunched. With her height and new girth, she looked like a linebacker. To add to her new look, she wore a bulky brown men's overcoat and a scarf tied over her wig, like a babushka. My immediate thought was, her outside now matches her inside. But it was her eyes that I noticed the most. About a year earlier, we had shown a photo of her to our kids so that if she ever approached them, they knew to run. At the time, my son who was young commented that she had mean eyes. Maybe it was that she had changed so much physically overall, but her dark eyes had narrowed into deep black slits. As she scanned the courtroom and saw us in court, she would turn around every so often to look back at us and glare. She would then whisper in her lawyer's ear and laugh as if she were having a grand time. She had a pair of big, round, cheap sunglasses that she would put on and take off intermittently. When she addressed the judge, she put them on, and he asked her to remove them. We thought that she was putting on a brave face and treating it all like a joke, but we were about to find out that getting arrested wouldn't slow her down. The restraining order didn't seem to faze her at all. If anything, it angered her more. From then on, every night and day, she would post her multiple fake social media accounts, posting photos of myself and of my husband. She would put up my husband's photo with the caption, "pedophile," or other terrible names that included racist and transphobic comments and captions. To give you a slight idea, she posted altered pictures of my husband, photoshopped to look like he was wearing heavy makeup, and referring to him as a pre-post-op transgender. She posted altered and unflattering photos of myself. She called me old and ugly, and those are the G-rated ones. Listen, I'm no beauty queen myself. The name calling, while obsessive and gross, wasn't what bothered me the most. Although I'm not gonna lie, seeing hundreds of photos of myself on her fake Twitter account, calling me ugly and obsessively pointing out every single little perceived flaw, did succeed in getting me down at times. Why did I keep looking? Because it was like getting a glimpse into her unraveling/unraveled mind, just in case there was a clue of what she was thinking of doing next. Because it wasn't her insulting post that fazed me. What bothered me the most were the sinister captions. "Keep an eye on your kids because I'll be watching," or "Why don't you plant some flowers in your front yard?" or "Be good to your kids because you never know what could happen." "How was your Uber Eats order?" She would post pictures of me with an arrow directed to my head, which I perceived to be a gun to my head. She posted some pictures of my husband's workplace, which she was not allowed to be within 2 blocks of, in accordance to the restraining order. But the police said that this could just be a picture she took from the internet. She posted Agatha Christie quotes like, "Every killer is usually someone you know well," or "Your end is near." Her Twitter profile banner was a picture taken from a movie poster and said, "Stalker," like she was in on the joke. We called the police again, but they said there wasn't anything they could do, since she didn't explicitly tag us. I took screenshots of everything. Many of her posts were nonsensical, but most of the photos posted of us on this fake account, all altered with derogatory or ominous captions, but we couldn't get her shut down. I became anxious anytime my kids were outside shooting hoops in the driveway. My elderly mother wouldn't take the baby out in the stroller. She was too scared. It affected all of our lives. Life became dramatic. Ex-beauty queen would taunt us with "Catch me if you can." She posted close-ups of her dog's genitals, or a piece of her dog's shit with my name beside it. The implication obvious. It bothered me now that she had a dog, since I didn't think someone like her would be capable of caring for anything living. Then the calls started back up. This time our home line. "Bitch." And then hang up. "Karma will get you." And then weird little chant-like calls, as if she were reciting a spell. Sure enough, she posted photos of a pentagram and candles, in some sort of altar with the caption, "Ring ring. Finally. Finally." The police asked us to come in and give video statements. We gave them a drive containing thousands of screenshots of posts she had made. They arrested her again and charged her with 2 more counts of criminal harassment. My husband was angry at this point, but as Mama Bear, I just wanted to get this over with. She mentioned the kids frequently and ominously many times in her online rants, also calling them rude names, which I won't repeat here because these are the things that upset me the most. The judge also issued a social media ban for her. By the time she was rearrested for the second time, her fake Twitter account, which was literally mostly insults or references to my family, had 16,000 tweets in a 3-month period. She had no followers, so they were just to herself. The porn sites I had been continuously being tagged on stopped. Things quieted down tremendously, but I still get follower requests that I believe are her. But at this point, we were all on edge. I kid you not. I felt weird walking into my kitchen at night to make a sandwich, feeling creeped out that she was outside watching. I put nothing past her, as nothing is more dangerous than a desperate woman who has nothing to lose, which, by the way, was one of the quotes she posted. I don't know what's wrong with her. I believe from what I've researched that she's a malignant narcissist. Perhaps some other mental issues at play here, but I can say that she was a terrible person long before she decided to try and make our lives miserable. Crazy beauty queen turned stalker? I would love nothing more than to never meet again. But if going to court helps you stay away from us forever, then bring it. As an aside, I wanted to mention that we heard from a reliable source that after my husband broke up with her, she allegedly became known to police for other reasons. While my husband dodged a bullet regarding her threats to go to police saying he abused her, apparently, other men have not been so lucky. Since I can't post pictures, I'll leave you with one of her posts, one that may not make much sense, but to us, it was a statement to let us know that she enjoys the drawn-out court process. Many of her posts are in her native language, so this is translated. Violent women and the cruelest never answer questions. They like to continue the misunderstanding indefinitely, so I seek to contact people only in order to torment them. My cruelty is my last attachment to the world, and my last chick. Don't follow vultures. When I was younger, about 10 years ago, I got into bird watching. I was about 12, so it really wasn't official by any means. I was just some kid that liked to sneak up on birds, take pictures, and look them up in books. I decided to start this hobby by making a list, with pictures I had printed from the library, of native birds in my region. Every weekend, I'd wander around the neighborhood in search of new birds. With a few ponds and a large creek in the area, I found quite a few within my first few weeks. However, there was one bird I had set as my sort of white whale, due to its rarity in the area. The black vulture. We have tons of turkey vultures in my area. They are most common, but much fewer black vultures. They are a bit hard to tell the difference if they are flying too high. The best way to determine which vulture it is has to do with how much gray-white is on their wings. If they got closer, you could eventually make out the red head of the turkey vulture, as often I did, disappointingly. Unfortunately, I cannot remember the exact date or what month it even was. I went climbing over the small wire fencing around the nearby bushy area, as per usual, and searched. Usually you had the best luck finding scavenger birds on roadkill, besides the road, and there so happened to be a small 2-lane winder that mirrored the creek nearby, just through the foliage, so I cut across the sort of mini forest headed in that direction. As much as it made me sad to see a dead deer or possum, it was a common sight on this road, as both sides are open, with trees and undergrowth almost choking it. There are some parts of the road that almost become sort of a tunnel, due to the leaves intertwining above. It was incredibly easy for deer or some other animal to jump out in front of a car, in the dark, with neither party realizing until it was too late. I didn't have much luck. There were a few crows on the smear of a squirrel, and I saw a few ducks swimming in the creek besides me, but nothing big. It started getting late, but the sun was still up, and despite the dangers of walking down a forest in the dark, I was determined to stay out as long as possible. I decided to reach a small park area at the end of the road, and then I'd make my way back. I went under a small tunnel of leaves and came out the other side, and was delighted to see the familiar shape of a large bird in the sky, circling. It was just the right shape and size to be a vulture, but I had no hope of checking for the grayness of its feathers, as the sunlight was limited. Instead, I was stuck following it as it slowly began to sink lower. After about 10 or so minutes, it landed, and I carefully snuck forward, cautiously avoiding anything that could alert the bird of my presence. I sunk low to the ground, realizing that the bird had landed on a small clearing in the far end of the park. It was just a small open field, slightly tilted down a hill, with the parking lot on the top. I had been there before, as it was a fun spot for kids to roll down the hill because of how steep it was. I approached it from the bottom, excitement brimming when I heard the several squawks and shrieks of other birds. Black vultures are more aggressive than turkeys, and I was hoping to catch a spat. I got to the edge of the clearing and pulled out my binoculars. Two things hit me at once here. One, I found it odd that they were in the middle of the park, rather than closer to the road, where you'd assume they'd find roadkill, though I reasoned things could die anywhere, even in the middle of a park. However, secondly, it smelled awful. The scent was rather light, but I've been known to have a really sensitive nose, and just this sharp, coppery scent, like when you pull up rotten ground meat out of a bag. It smelled like roadkill before, and in the heart of the day, it smelled bad, but nothing like this. When I put my binoculars to my eyes, I expected a deer corpse and birds fighting. I never in a million years thought I would see the corpse of a completely different kind. The birds were there, and I remember the faint pang of excitement I still had, recognizing the proud head of a black vulture, before the image of it sitting on the chest of a naked woman sucked the life out of me. I was frozen, and I could not look away. My throat tightened with vomit, and I could not look away. The bird had done surprisingly little to her body. She had what I think were cuts, but most of her was intact. What wasn't, the birds were at. Her eyes, lips, and genitals were red and shredded. If there was a big defining wound, I missed it between the gathering of birds and the fading light. But what I did see, I can never forget. I haven't forgotten. I can pull up the image so clearly now. Even after all this time, she was pale, almost blue in places, with blonde, crinkled hair. I sat there stupidly for who knows how long, as the sun sunk behind the trees. This was a time before cell phones were a common thing, and I had quite the hike back home. I realized now I was in shock, and I could only move when the sudden fear of whoever did this could be nearby hit me. I forced myself to slowly waddle backwards into the trees, not taking my eyes off of the body. I didn't want to turn around for some reason. I was so scared someone would be behind me. I thought if I just backed up forever, maybe nothing would happen. It was dusk, and suddenly there was light, high beams from the top of the hill. A single pair. I heard the screech of the tires as the car wheeled out, and listened to it veer off to the left and the way down the road opposite in the direction I was headed. That was the last straw, and I ran the entire way back the second I could no longer hear it. I crashed through at least a mile of brush, and while I was smart enough to have had boots and thick jeans on, my arms were bare and bleeding by the time I stopped. I paused midway through the brush by my house, realizing that embarrassingly, I had pissed myself in fear at some point, before nearly crawling my way through people's yards to get home, avoiding all passing cars. The horror didn't completely end there, as I was home alone until past midnight, as my mom worked late at a diner nearby. It's stupid, and I regret to this day, but no, I did not call the police instantly, nor my mom. I was stupidly afraid that if I did, my mom would get mad at me. I would never be allowed to go outside, or worse, they wouldn't believe me for some reason. I locked all the doors, double-checked, took a quick shower and locked myself in my room. I had fallen asleep somehow by the time my mom came home. I confronted her in the morning, at least, but by that time, when we had made the call together, the body had already been found. They took my statement, but we never got any calls back. I stopped birdwatching. I tried my best to find an article or news somewhere about this, but I failed in finding anything. It probably doesn't help that I can't remember the exact date. There are very few things I remember so well, this being one of them. I have never shared this story with anybody outside my own family, but I thought it might fit here, and I apologize if not. It was sort of therapeutic, I think, writing this out after so long. I'm going to keep trying to find something to verify this, and I'll update ASAP if I can.